All right. Well, so thank you everyone for joining us for our Juneteenth 2024 presentation discussing preserving your history with myself, Dr. Lopez Matthews Jr., the State Archivist for DC. And you may be wondering why, we're doing this presentation for Juneteenth. And we're doing this because Juneteenth is a day to celebrate the end of slavery in the United States, the end of the institution of slavery in the United States, when the last group of enslaved people discovered that they were free and were able to live in freedom. And this day was celebrated in Texas since 1866. And they celebrated this day with picnics and getting together with families and celebrating the end of this terrible institution and the fact that they can now live free and maintain their families. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this presentation today is because one of the reasons we remember Juneteenth is because our history is so important, and preserving our own history is very important. So that's why I wanted to just take this time as we look back at history to talk about how you can preserve your family history, because your family history is important too. So that's why I thought this would be a good idea to talk to people and share some tips that I've learned throughout the years about preserving your family history. And so for those of you who don't know me, I am a graduate of Coppin State University. Now, you may not know Coppin State University. It is a small HBCU in Baltimore. We call it the concrete jungle because there are no trees. There are some trees now, but there weren't trees when I went there. Got my master's in public history from Howard, PhD in US history from Howard. And I've worked at the Maryland State Archives, National Archives, Moreland Spingarn at Howard, and the Black History Program of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I'm currently the State Archivist of Washington, D.C. And I mentioned the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission because I worked with a lot of community groups with the Black History Program at the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And one of the things that we did was talk to people about how they could preserve their history. Now it's Black history because, as you see, I like Black history, so that's my primary focus. But we talked about simple ways that people in the community could preserve their history because their history is important. And we wanted them to be able to preserve their history themselves without feeling like they had to give it to someone or send it somewhere else to be preserved. We wanted to show them ways that they could preserve it on their own for their families. And so that's why I put this presentation together. And one of the things that I think people should understand as they begin to do a project where they're preserving their family history is to say, what is their purpose for preserving that history? Do you want to keep it in your house to preserve for perpetuity, not let it out, not let anyone see it? Or do you want to share it with your families, take it out at family reunions, let people see it, put together little family exhibits that let people come in and look at their history and learn about it? I was just talking to someone just the other day who was telling me how they went to their great aunt's house and she had all these pictures of people that he'd never seen before. His grandmother, his great grandmother, his grandfather, great uncles, people that he'd never known about. He was so excited to see them. And so, what is your purpose? And then let that guide you in how you go about preserving your history. Now, I feel like, yeah. So you say, how do I begin that? What's the first thing you want to do? And the first thing you want to do is talk to your relatives, particularly your older relatives, and say, what do you have? What do we have here? What do you have in a box? What do you have in that closet? What do you have in the basement? that tells the story of our family? Do you have uh, funeral programs, obituaries? A lot of people save obituaries. Obituaries have a lot of great historical information about families. They really help you do genealogical research because they tell that person's story and connect them to their families. So you say, well, what do you have? Do you have pictures? What do you have? Like, for example, my family didn't do well with preserving their history. And so we lost a lot of it in a fire. And so, like, I wanted a picture of my grandfather when he was young. And my great aunt said, oh, we don't have any pictures because all those burned up in the fire. And so we've lost a lot of our history because we didn't preserve it well. And so you say, well, what materials do you need? And as I mentioned, the fire that happened at my great grandmother's house, there are fireproof boxes that you can buy to store your family history in. You can purchase that. I also recommend plastic bins if you're not going to go so far as to purchase the fireproof box. Purchase plastic bins to place the material in. Where should they be stored? And I'll tell you that a little bit later about where they should be stored. So I will start with photos. Photos are often in scrapbooks. Scrapbooks are very acidic. They tend to destroy photos. So I recommend taking them out of, if you can, if the scrapbook isn't necessarily something pretty and historic, like sometimes people glue things together, which is dangerous in and of itself, but there are things you can do to help preserve that. But if they're just in an old photo album, start by getting photo sleeves, taking them out of those plastic wraps that they're in, peel it out, and as safely and securely as you can, unloosen it from that glue and place it in acid-free envelopes that you can buy from a place like Gaylord. Or you can go to somewhere like Michael's. Michael's now has a lot of acid-free material that you can buy. A lot of us shop online, so you could go to Gaylord. They are a great, they're very affordable for buying archival material. They know a lot of people are trying to use this. So go there, buy acid-free photo sleeves so that you can place your photos in something acid-free. Buy acid-free boxes, place them in the fireproof safe or in the plastic bin so that you can preserve your history. Because another thing that happens is flooding or leaks can destroy your photos. So acid-free, then in plastic container, fireproof. So take them out, put them on acid-free paper in an acid-free sleeve. You can also buy, if you like photo albums, you can buy acid-free photo albums. They do sell acid-free photo albums that you can use to that you can purchase to place your photos in if you want them to have easier access. So you can buy acid-free photo scrapbooks. Where should you store them? And I'll repeat this later again, but I recommend storing them in a closet, on the top shelf in a closet, not in your attic, not in your basement, because your roof leaks, your basement floods. Safest place is in an attic. In a closet. The best place to store your photos because it stays relatively dark because you don't go in your closet a lot. And it'll be relatively safe because most people aren't going through your closet. So it'll sit back there by themselves, safe. As I mentioned, store them in a cool, dry place, not the basement. Your basement floods. I recently had a flood, not recently, but a couple years ago, I had a flood in my home. I thankfully had nothing on the floor. So I didn't lose a lot because it had happened before and we lost several photos. So we understood, okay, nothing on the floor and things were in plastic bins. So the only thing that had to be replaced was the flooring and the walls. So we didn't lose any of our family material because, well, first it wasn't in the basement, but also the things that were in the basement were in plastic bins. like you see in this picture, there's something in a plastic bin. That Christmas tree wreath is fine because it's in the plastic. So where to properly store it, not in the basement, not in the attic, in a closet or a room where, if it's going to be in a room where people don't highly traffic, so that it can stay cool and dark. And so what do you need? As you see in the image here, those are acid-free boxes. You can buy them in all kinds of sizes. They come in all sizes. They aren't that expensive. Also, I recommend Mylar sleeves, as you see in the image of the person holding the postcard. That's not plastic. It is a different kind of film that you can wrap your images in or your paper documents in, particularly paper documents if they're torn. Because one of the worst things that you can do to a document is put tape on it. Because tape is very acidic and tape will destroy your documents in 10, 15, 20 years, even sooner, depending on the condition. Tape is very destructive. And so I recommend putting it in a Mylar or polyester sleeve. They come in all sizes. So there's nothing too big. There's Mylar sleeves that are the size of architectural drawings. So if it's large enough, you can find a Mylar sleeve to place it in. Do not tape it. Just turn it around to the edge so that whatever's torn stays in the corner and it doesn't fall out. But they also kind of hold themselves together so that you don't have to do anything to it. You can keep it in the Mylar sleeve and it'll be safe. So I'm not a fan of tape. I did a presentation once where someone insisted that they liked a special kind of tape. And I said, well, you know, use your tape. I've seen what that tape does. We have some, I've been in an archive where they have books that have the special kind of tape, and the special kind of tape turns to string and is destroying the book because tape is bad. Now, you see this person in the picture has on white gloves. White gloves are good for photographs. They're great for handling photographs. They keep the grease from your fingers off the photographs. Easy for handling, white gloves. White gloves are not good for historic books because it has fibers that come off and they get lodged in the book and it starts to mess with the historic book. So, and I know sometimes you see people on television using white gloves because people expect to see them. So people will put them on just so people won't criticize them. So like, oh my God, they don't have gloves. But you really could use latex gloves, or if your hands are clean and dry, it's fine to handle the book as long as your hands are clean and dry. But if you're worried about it, use non-powder latex gloves to hold historic books. One of the things that, as I mentioned, I was at Moreland Springer Research Center. We have books from the 1700s, and I was digitizing a book, a diary from one of the people who founded the country of Liberia. It was from the 1790s. And I handled that book with the latex gloves because I didn't want to destroy the book by using the cotton gloves, the white gloves, because they do get into the book. And so if you leave with one thing, two things from here, no tape and latex gloves for books. But one of the things that I like to mention is that you can't buy these things. Like I said, they're at Michael's, they're at Gaylord, or I believe Uline sells them too. So there are a couple other companies that sell archival boxes, archival materials. And those are the best way to preserve your history. Now, you may say, I want to display my family history. I want to create something like this to show off at family reunions or family events. What's the best way to do that? And you can do that. You can put it, if it's wrapped, protected, particularly if it's protected in Mylar, you can put it out for a short period of time. However, I'm not a fan of putting out original documents. And so I recommend digitization. I am a digitization person. I like digitization. I'm building a digital program at the DC Archives. I built one at Moreland Spingarn to digitize their collection. And it's really good for, one, preserving the documents, sharing it with your families, but also for creating those displays that you see. You can use your HP printer or Dell printer that has a scanner on it, and you can go in and you can change the setting and change that setting to 600 dots per inch or 600 DPI. And you can scan your photos, and those will be at archival quality, preservation level scans. You scan them as a 600 dots per inch TIFF, which is uncompressed. So you can blow it up, shrink it, do what you would like. If you're scanning negatives, scan them at 1200, but for photos, scan them at 600 dots per inch, and then print out a copy, and then put that on display. And keep the original safe and store it in a way. A lot of times when you go to museums or you see exhibits, maybe less museums, but sometimes museums, you don't even realize that you're looking at a beautiful printout of an original document because people want to preserve the documents, because light is destructive. You leave it out in the light, light destroys document, it fades ink, it fades photos. So scan a good copy, print out a high quality copy, and put that copy on display for your family to see. You'll protect the document, but people can still see it. And it'll look great. And sometimes, you can use it for a replacement for an original if something does happen. So that's one of the benefits of digitization, not necessarily to replace the original, but to support making it accessible to people and support showcasing it so it's not sort of hidden away all the time. Now, one of the things that I do want to share, and I'm going to email everyone who registered this link so that they can go to the site because it is very useful and very helpful, is the Northeast Document Conservation Center. And I'm going to change my share screen to show the site. There it is. And can you all see this?
Yes.
Great. So this site provides resources for audio preservation, book preservation resources, caring for private and family collections, emergency preparedness resources, funding opportunities, digital preservation, digital imaging resources. So much. I'm reading everything. Preservation 101, replacing your vital records. They have so many resources for you, leaflets that you can print out, video trainings. And you can also write them and ask them questions, which is very helpful. I have this photo. It's one of the things that happens with family photos is they're in a frame. They've been in the frame for 30 years. All of a sudden, it gets wet. It's sticking to the frame. What do we do? You can ask the NEDC what you can do, DCC what you can do to preserve that photo. And they can give you tips for how you can properly release that photo from the frame. One of the things that happened while I was at Howard was we got a donation of a great photo of the Howard track team from 1925, but it was stuck to the frame. And so one of the things that we did was we had a large enough scanner. And so we actually digitized the photo in the frame and kept the original scan, of course, but then we took a copy of that scan and dolled it up a little bit. If I had it readily available, I would show you because I'm so proud of my work. It took me several days to clean up that photo and it looks beautiful. You couldn't realize that it came from something stuck in a frame, but that's something that you can do as well. you can scan it in the frame and fix it up later so that you still have that photo. But you can also ask the NEDCC and they'll tell you how to preserve that that photo. And so I wanted to give my presentation, but I also wanted to give time for questions in case anyone had any questions about how they could preserve their family history. So you all can turn on your cameras or unmute and ask any questions that you might have. And I see Linda White is here from the Afro-American Genealogical History Society. They are out there as well. They can provide support and they can provide help with genealogical research or resources you can find. So thank you for coming, Linda.
Can you?
I can hear you. Uh-oh. You unmuted, then you muted.
I know. That's because I'm driving.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for being here. But they're great. There are organizations around. They have a DC chapter. The DC chapter is full of some really great people. And I say that because 3 of my professors are in the DC chapter of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. So they are there to help. So,
Dr. Matthews, this is Joshua from the Office of the Secretary.
yes, sir.
Great presentation. Very informative, like always. My question to you would be, could you speak to the recent onset of, maybe it's not so recent, of like online databases and companies, maybe like Ancestry or 23andMe? Like, I know that might not be directly related to preservation of, I guess, like history in the way that, like in terms of like manuscripts, but if you could speak a little bit to your experience with those organizations and maybe how we should navigate selecting ones and whether we should even use them at all, Thank you.
Well, I will say, and I'll say this is just this part right here is just for me. I am not interested in submitting my DNA to a company because they do sell your DNA. And I just don't feel comfortable with that. So I don't submit my DNA to companies, but resources like Ancestry and Family Search and Fold3 are very useful to people in looking up public records and documents. They're one-stop shops for finding historical documents. You can go to places like your state archive, which often have the records available on their website. So if you don't want to pay for Ancestry, you can go to your state archives websites. A lot of them do. Here in DC, we are just now starting to put up birth and death certificates, as well as marriage records. We have the first few years of birth certificates up. The first few years of death certificates are available, and marriage records before 1870 are available. Now, those are metadata records because are no certificates available prior to 1870, but they are a wealth of information. Actually, one of the things that I remember about the marriage records was there was a record of a marriage of this African-American couple who, as you know, during the period of slavery, those who were enslaved could not officially marry. And this African-American couple were together for 50 years. And after the end of slavery, they got married, and it was noted in the record that that they were together for over 50 years. And I just thought that was just so amazing to me that you could find that. And I'm getting emotional right now talking about it. But I just thought it was so great because most states have them in their records. I see a question. Each state is publishing these birth and death records. Most records have them published or have them available. We're just starting here in DC with them, but they're coming slowly but surely. If you go to archives.dc.gov, I'll put that in the chat. You can see what we have up already. I'll type it, and then I'll go to your destiny as soon as I type this, because I don't want to lose my train of thought. There we go. All right, destiny.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a part of your previous Howard family. I was a student when you were working at the One Springfield Center. And I remember giving tours in there. And one time you corrected me, so I appreciate that. But my question was more centered around, I guess, like strategy and the approach around recording your records. Obviously, you mentioned talking with our older relatives, which is, ideal, of course, for the time. And I would imagine that one should work with records that they already have. But aside from that, the thought of it kind of feels overwhelming because I'm like, where should I start? Then I find this cousin's picture. Should I look for the other cousin's picture and like trying to get the tree together? But I just wanted to know if you had any other like general tips or strategies when you're trying to, like, if someone was trying to jumpstart this.
I would recommend talking to the family members that you are closest to,
Okay.
because it's like starting with a friendly audience. You talk to your mother, talk to your father, talk to their parents, talk to your aunts and uncles. And as you gather this material, you can then talk to other relatives and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to prepare our family history. I'm trying to preserve our history. I want to make it available to our families. That's a very important thing to note, especially when you're talking to your family, because sometimes they'll think, oh, well, they're just trying to hoard it to themselves. And you say, no, I'm not trying to hoard this. I'm not trying to take this. I want to preserve it for our family so that everyone can know our history. And because I talk about my own people all the time. We had that. They're like, oh, look at it. They're trying to get get in everybody's business. No, not trying to get in everybody's business. I'm just trying to preserve the history. I just want to save the pictures. People like pictures. So if you use the pictures to get in, you're like, oh, I just want to save these pretty pictures. You know, People will give some pictures like, oh, look at me and look at this one and look at that one. And like, oh, if you don't want to get it to me, let me just scan these pictures. And you just scan that high resolution tip scan and say, okay, here's the original. And now I have this picture. So, your family, it takes, there was something that was said to me, Mrs. as you at Howard, so you might remember Mrs. Elbashir, Joellen Elbashir, said to me, you got to use some honey when you talk to people. You use honey, they'll give it to you because she did a lot of donor relations. And she said sometimes it doesn't happen in a day. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes it takes several conversations to get people to give you the information that you're looking for. So understand that it may take some time to get that information, but you have to stick at it and stay consistent. And just remind them, you're not doing it for any nefarious reason. You're just doing it to preserve your family's history because it's important. And it can seem overwhelming because you're like, wait, it's everything. I want to do this. I want to do that. That's how I get. I get really excited and I want to do everything. But you have to kind of map it out, plan it out, and say, okay, I'm going to go through this family, this person first, this person next, and just kind of pace yourself. So, because realize it's to quote my own boss, who unfortunately could not be here today, Secretary Bassett, she always tells me, it's a marathon, not a race. And so keep that in mind. It's a marathon, not a race. And Courtney, you mentioned, do you recommend storing, sharing on the cloud or using shared drives? I do like cloud drives. Cloud drives are very useful, but I also recommend having them on a solid state hard drive. And when you go on Amazon or you go to Walmart, you will see it'll say on the hard drive, solid state hard drive. Those are much more stable than just a regular hard drive that you buy at a store or something. So get you a solid state hard drive. How you doing, Linda? Oh, go.
I finally made it. I'm home. I'm going to turn on my desktop in a minute. Sorry, I'm late, but I heard almost everything. Yes. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Sharing a lot of important information. And thanks for giving a shout out to AUGS, because people need to know about the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. We have lots and lots of information to share too about preserving your family stories.
Well, great. That's how I learned myself.
Right, there you go.
So I'm just passing it on, paying it forward.
That's right.
But
it's like some of our elders, they say everything they know about genealogy, they learn from somebody else. So yes, it passes down and we got to pay it forward for sure.
Oh yeah. But yes, I recommend the cloud drive, but also solid state drives, and then double check them after a while, because like CDs, where people were burning things to CDs maybe 10, 15 years ago, those CDs that you burn might be blank because they only are guaranteed to last for 10 years. And most people didn't know that they were only guaranteed for 10 years. So I always say, okay, cloud and a solid state drive that you don't keep connected to your computer, because if someone hacks it, they can get into the drive too. And keep it in that same cool, dry place in the plastic bin, but double check it the National Archives checks their digital files every 5 years, because you want to check for bit rot and which is degrading of electronic files. I'll just beat you there. But electronic files can degrade over time. And so you don't want to have those electronic files degrade on you and you can't access them. You also have to worry about obsolescence with electronic files. And so you want to make sure that, like, people used WordPerfect in the early 2000s, then all of a sudden WordPerfect went away. You couldn't access any of those files. And so I recommend saving things in a rich text format. If it's a document, save your photos TIFF or JPEG, because those are not proprietary file types. Like when you use Photoshop, it'll save it as a PSD file. That's a proprietary file to Adobe, to Photoshop. So if you don't have Photoshop anymore, you won't be able to access that file. So that's why I always recommend saving TIFF or JPEG, because those are non-proprietary file types. PDF is as well, but they're compressed. And so it's not the highest of quality. So that's why I always recommend the TIFF. That's why the TIFF is recommended. That's actually what's recommended by digitization, those who are in digital preservation. They recommend TIFF, uncompressed TIFF, as your file type that you scan at. We scan at that in the DC archives for our digital files that we put in our digital preservation system. We just acquired a digital preservation system for DC that takes the files and saves them in these non-proprietary formats. It converts them to non-proprietary formats and does fixity checks and checks the files for bit rot and being degraded and all of that. And so it does it for us. But most people at home, you wouldn't want to pay for a whole digital preservation system. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of documents, so it's worth it for us to have that system. But as a person at home, I just say, put it on the solid state, check it every couple of years just to make sure it's still working. If it's not working, copy it to another file before it changes. Or if you see it's becoming obsolete, like codecs are going out, change it to a different format. So you do have to be proactive with the preservation of these with the preservation of electronic documents, because they are not as stable as paper. So while we talk,
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So
suppose we do have lots and lots of photos and such.
Yes.
So maybe we have put them in the cloud. Maybe we still have print images.
Yes.
How do we make sure that they really, really are preserved? In other words, you, Lopez, and I are not going to be here forever.
Right.
We have maybe children, grandchildren, friends, cousins, relatives. We can't count on those friends or relatives to take care of our materials. Do you have a recommendation? And this is for both print and digital. I'm especially concerned about digital stuff. How do we make sure that others have the logins, passwords, and such for our digital files?
So one of the things that if you don't trust your family to preserve it, like I will say, I have a godson who has already told me I have 530 books. And I know that because I cataloged them. And he has already told me, when you go, those books are gone.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So I know that if I want that stuff to be saved, I'm going to have to find an archival repository to donate that stuff to. So if you don't feel that your family is going to actually preserve it, then you can find an institution that will take it. Since I have a connection to Howard, I donate my stuff, maybe my personal stuff to Howard. My work stuff, of course, would be at the DC Archives, but my personal stuff would be at Howard. And they do take, or find an institution in your community that would preserve family history that you can donate. Because there are, as I mentioned, Moreland has family collections. When I was there was a person who called. She said there was a woman that she was helping. She was in her 90s. She was a sharecropper from Alabama. She had all of her documents, all of her history, and she was afraid that they would be thrown away. And so she moved it to, she wanted to give it to Howard. She wanted to give it to Moreland Sparrow because she heard about it. She knew it was a great archival repository. And I said, well, it's great that, she's thinking about it. It's wonderful that she wants to put it in an archive for it to be preserved, but she should call Tuskegee because she's a person from Alabama. She's from that community. Her records don't need to be in DC. Her records should be in Alabama with other records related to her life and her history and her family. So they would be a better fit at Tuskegee because it is in Alabama. It is a Black archive. This is the story, that her papers tell. And so I connected her with the archivist for Tuskegee, and they did donate those records to Tuskegee. But I think if you are worried about that, you can find an archive, a local archive, community archive, or institution that you feel comfortable donating your records to, and call them, and they'll take it. They'll preserve it, make it available. Because that does happen. I got a phone call once. People like to call me. And I called and she said, I have this Bible that I found at a thrift store. And I think the people might be important. It's a Black family. And so I went and I met her at a coffee shop. And we had coffee and bagels. And then she gave me this diary. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God, this is the diary of one of the members of the family was Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who started the New Era Club, which was the predecessor to the National Association of Colored Women, the National Council of Negro Women. Her relative, who was listed in the Bible, was one of the first Black lawyers. I mean, this was a very accomplished family. Their family tree back to 1806 was in this Bible. There was a lock of hair. There was a dried flower. Wasn't quite sure who it related to, but their family history was in this Bible. And this woman just found it in a thrift store and she thought it was pretty. And so she bought it. And then when she actually looked inside, she was like, oh my God, this doesn't need to be in my house. So thankfully she did call. Now, Courtney, I see you asked, are the archives typically receptive to being approached? They are, some archives. Typically, yeah, most archives are interested in family stories, especially if they're in that community or if they're related to that, particularly if they're related to the institution in some way, and they'd be very receptive. Yeah, and it also takes, talking to them and seeing, oh, would you be receptive? Some would be, some would. Joshua, you asked, is there a recommended approach for converting original manuscripts and photos to digital? Is it as simple as making copies and taking photos? So it is not just that. That's one part of the process. Because I said, you can use your printer up that setting to 600 dots per inch. You can find it. Some don't make it easy. Like HP printers do not make it easy to find the dots per inch to change, but you can find it. I say, and I'm not paid, but I recommend Epson scanners. Those are the best that I have found. Epson scanners are the best. They have the best software and they're the simplest to use. But what you want to also do is create metadata. And metadata is basically information related to a document. The title, the creator, who's in the photo, all of the information related to that document so that I can stay with it. So I always say, put down the file name, give it a title, who's in the photo. You can do an Excel spreadsheet. People down Excel, but Excel is very useful. It is very useful. One of the things that you can also do is if you're worried about it, if you right click a photo or a file, there's a tab for information and you can type it in and it'll always stay with that file. If you type it in, if you embed it into the file. So you can type it in and it'll stay with the file so that you click it, you go, oh, here's all the information about the file right here. But create a spreadsheet to keep the metadata or the information related to your photos and documents. And you can also put it in the file. If you right click it, you'll see that come up. Let me click a photo myself. Let me find a photo and right click it, see what it says. Yeah, it's called details. So if you right click a photo, it'll say details and you can click in there and type in information related to the photo. And that'll stay with you. So now one of the things that people are doing now, and I am a fan of scanners, but the new thing in digitization is buying these cameras, solid state cameras that you can take a photo of it. We have a couple at the DC archives to take photos of things, and those are useful, especially if you have something that can't bend. Because the book I was telling you about from the 1790s couldn't open all the way. And so if you open it all the way, you would destroy the book. Because that's one thing to remember about digitization. It can be very destructive. So don't destroy your document to digitize it, please. I had someone tell me once, oh, it's okay to destroy the original, you're digitizing it. I almost had a stroke right there. Take your time, maybe take a picture of it. I really did almost have a stroke. I was like, because they opened the book and tore it. And I was like, oh my God, Grace.
Well, that's why I asked, because I do think that a lot of folks are, let me not, generalize, but a lot of people are to the place where we realize that everything should be moving digital if we're talking about preservation. So, I just thank you for your answer, because I kind of wanted to know, like, what are some best practices? What's the best approach to take with this? So you're clearing up a lot for me. Thank you.
Now, one of the things that I will say, and I know I'm being recorded, but it does take good photos. But if you have an iPhone, it takes some good photos. So you can put it over and click with your iPhone, and you'll have that image. Now, it might not be the most digital preservation copy, but you'll have a digital copy that you can work with. So, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. You don't want folks to open it. You don't want folks to touch it. You're just going to slide this phone in there, click it, and now I have my pictures. And I can make copies. I can put them in a cloud drive. I can put them on a hard drive, and we can put this book away, wrap it in acid-free paper, put it in the acid-free box, and put it in our plastic tub, and put it in the closet. And we don't have to touch it. So, any other questions? I'm gonna take note here, so I send you all of these recommendations that I've made today. Because remember, I said I'm gonna email you solid state hard drives. So solid state hard drives, if you're digitizing, as well as the cloud, is okay. Digitize at uncompressed TIFF.
And do you recommend a specific brand for a solid state hard drive?
And
you are talking about an external drive, right?
Yes, external hard drive. Solid state external drive. Yeah. I have used Seagate. I've had luck with Seagate as a solid state external hard drive.
Spell that S-E-A.
Oh, S-E-A-G-A-T-E.
Seagate, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So store your documents in a cool, dry place, not the basement or attic. Acid-free boxes, folders. And what else did I say? Can't remember, but it's all right. Because I'll send you the link to the National Document Conservation Center, which has many resources to help you. So you are not alone. And you can also ask me. You all know how to find me. I work for your city government.
And will that resource center literally scan materials for us, or they
so
just
you can pay them? You can pay them to.
Mm-hmm.
If you pay them, they'll do. But there
Mm-hmm.
are grants that help you with
Mm-hmm.
preserving family history. There are some grants out there, and they have something on the website that help with that.
Okay.
Yeah, because sometimes people support community archive beneath them. So I hope that you've learned a lot. I hope this has been helpful to you. I wanted to give some simple tips for people to do to preserve their family history. It's very important. I was so sad to learn that most of our family's history was destroyed in a fire. And so I've had to try to recreate our connection. Like I learned that my great aunt is Ma Rainey. Didn't know that. Yeah,
Wow.
my great-grandfather's, she was my great-grandfather's sister. And I was like, oh, well, who knew? So we actually do have someone important in the family, or of prominence in the family, because everybody's important, but of prominence. And then I did my Matthews family genealogy, took it back to my first African-American relative, Abram Matthews, who was buried. And remember at the beginning, I mentioned I worked for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. one of the places that we oversaw was Queens Chapel United Memorial Cemetery. My oldest Matthews relative is buried in that cemetery, and I had no idea. So now I'm like, oh, now I gotta go back. So it's great to preserve your history. It's fantastic dedication, definitely a labor of love. And so I wish you all great luck. And so thank you all for that.